With the release of Black Widow, we now have 24 films inside of the MCU list, so today I thought it was time for me to stop and rank all 24 films inside of the MCU list, ranked from the worst to the best. Please note that everything that I will say in this video is just my very own opinion, and you are free to comment down below your ranking of all 24 MCU films, ranked from the worst to the best just like me, or you could just do your favor. Please don't forget to check out that Twitter that's going to pop up on your screen right now. You can also check out that Black Widow movie review, that link is in the description, and also you can check out everything Marvel related that I have on my channel in that playlist up above. Also, please note that this is, a longer ranking than my last MCU ranking, but I just wanted to, flesh out my thoughts a little bit more here, so this video is a little bit more laid back. With that being said, let's just move right into our ranking. Kicking off my list at number 24 for me has got to go to Thor: The Dark World. Again, this film is at the bottom of my list, just like a lot of other people, mainly because it's pretty bland. But there is some likability about this film. I mean, although other comic book films that are lower on my list, yeah, they are pretty bad. They're not rewatchable. This one is actually pretty rewatchable in the sense that you like certain things about it. Like the Loki and Thor chemistry, their relationship inside of this film, the adventure that those two go on. It's all pretty great. The final battle to me is still pretty good because when Thor goes through different realities, the Mjolnir just goes right back up into Asgard. Also, we get another Infinity Stone getting introduced. It has that MCU shine to it, so it's not all the way terrible. Just for MCU standards, it deserves to be at the bottom. At number 23 for me has got to go to Iron Man 2. I mean, as someone who watched this film, and this was the first MCU film I've ever seen, as someone who watched this film years ago, I mean, I still pretty much like this film. Now, I wouldn't say that I love it as much as I did. I still kind of love it a little bit. But to me, I find this film to be very watchable, very likable, very enjoyable. I really do like this movie. It's only the fact that other MCU films are better, and also this one is weighed down by too many plot lines, too many cooks in the kitchen, and unfortunately that is because of Jon Favreau's not being able to get 3 years to work on the script properly. All around, this film just feels like a prelude to the Avengers while also trying to set up the Avengers, but also trying to be a standalone story. And at the time at Marvel, this was really all they were trying to get to, was the Avengers. So we have this solo film that could have standed on its own with the plot lines that they had, but they also had to shoe in the Avengers prelude inside of it, so it comes off as being a big mess. But I gotta say, I'd be lying to you guys if I think that this movie is all around terrible, and I think that this film is just the worst comic book film I've ever seen. Like I said, it has some likability inside of it. It's very enjoyable. Robert Downey Jr. is still pretty great. Scarlett Johansson gets introduced as Black Widow. Justin Hammer, he's awesome in it. I lean more towards Terrence Howard as Rhodey, but Don Cheadle being Rhodey, very cool here. We have all of the Iron Man action that ensues inside of it. All of it works, just the plot doesn't. Coming in at number 22 for me has got to go to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I promise you guys, this is not because of Sean Chandler. A little bit of it is because of Sean Chandler. He made me rethink and reevaluate my points on this movie, but everything that I still liked about the movie, I still love about the movie. Everything that he pointed out that he didn't like about the movie, I did disagree with some of his points. Now, I do believe that this film is worse than the first Guardians film. I do think that this film is on the bottom tier of Marvel, but that's only because other films are better than this. Other films have a better job of balancing the tones and finding something for these characters to do. All around, the villain doesn't really do anything aside of this film except for prophesize and talk about where he laid his seed at, and talk about how he killed Peter Quill's mother, and that's a big thing. But in my opinion, I believe that Ego should have been a little bit more. A lot of people think that Ego is a great villain. I do think that he's a good villain. He's very menacing, but at the end of the day, they really didn't give him that big of a job to do inside of this film. All around, they have some big CGI battles, which are all okay, pretty good, but it just comes off as a CGI hodgepodge. The characters in and of itself are still pretty hilarious. I love their family. I love Rocket's characterization inside of this film. I loved what they did with Yondu. I loved what they did with Nebula. Star-Lord, not so much, but at the same time, I still liked what they did with him. Overall, this film still has that MCU polish to it, but it felt like they gave James Gunn a little bit more freedom than they did on the first Guardians film. So instead of feeling heartfelt, it just felt like, let's have Looney Tunes cartoonish humor in this scene, but in the next scene, let's have Groot getting stepped on. Yeah, the tones didn't really work in that sense. At number 21 for me, it's got to go to The Incredible Hulk. I never really hated this movie. I mean, back when The Incredible Hulk came out, I mean, the only reason why I really wanted to see it was because I knew that Robert Downey Jr. was going to be in it. So I was like, okay, Iron Man's in this movie. I want to see Iron Man. But I ended up really enjoying The Incredible Hulk. I do like The Incredible Hulk. We get some Hulk mayhem in there. We got a great villain in Abomination. All around, it is the black sheep of the MCU, and it should be called the black sheep. I mean, this is a Universal film. It's not Marvel proper, is not Paramount proper. So at the end of the day, I do believe that this film is the black sheep of the MCU, but I nowhere believe that this film is terrible or this film is bad. It is a little bit bland, it is a little bit boring, but that all comes with the character of Bruce Banner, because the one thing that we want to see Bruce Banner do is turn into the Hulk. But with that being said, I loved what they did with the characterization of Bruce Banner, with him resisting the Hulk throughout the film, and it makes it so much satisfying when we get to see the Hulk just battle it out with the Abomination in the streets, pick up police cars and use them as boxing gloves and just punch Abomination, or just have him rampage through the college campus. All of that was pretty great for me. It just comes off as pretty bland because it is the black sheep and comes off as very forgettable. Kicking off my top 20 list for me has got to go to Captain Marvel. Another film that I don't think is as terrible or as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. Yes, it is on the bottom tier of Marvel, just like the other films that I just reviewed. But this film is a lot better than those films because I love the 90s aesthetic of it. I love the 90s callbacks. I love seeing a less stoic Nick Fury. I think Brie Larson is good in the role. Not great yet, but I think that she's good in the role. But a big negative to me is that it feels like the plot isn't really all there. We don't really get to connect with the character of Captain Marvel because she is very distant throughout the entire film, because she doesn't even know who she is. So we can't even understand who she is or learn about who she is because she doesn't even know who she is yet. And it all comes down to the fact that, to me, in my opinion, they focused on trying to make a female superhero movie than actually trying to make a superhero movie. And I can understand that perfectly well. I'm not saying that Captain Marvel is bad. I actually do like Captain Marvel. Like I said, I love the 90s aesthetic. I love the whole X-Files vibe to it. I love the Skrulls. I like Brie Larson in the role. I love seeing a less stoic Nick Fury. All of it worked for me. Just the plot and just the overall structure of the film doesn't. But I'd be lying if I didn't get a smile on my face seeing Captain Marvel blast through Kree ships. Just saying. At number 19 has got to go to Thor. Another film that a lot of people don't really like for some reason. They call it bland too, and I agree with that. When they say that it's bland and it's mostly bland on New Mexico, I can agree 100% with that. So that's my negatives on the film, but everything else I enjoy. Like, I love Thor. I love this film. And it took me a couple of years to actually love this film, but I love it. I love the score. I love Thor in it. I love the themes of brothers, and I love the themes of fathers and sons, and just having this charismatic actor like Anthony Hopkins coming into the role of Odin, giving some gravitas to it, just having it feel so elegant. The scenes on Asgard are just great. They're grandiose. All of it worked for me. Just that stuff on New Mexico is pretty bland, and how Thor fell in love with Jane in just like one night of him explaining his life. But all around, they have some hilarious stuff go down in New Mexico. I love the character development that Thor goes through on New Mexico. Everything works except for some of that stuff on New Mexico with Jane and her friends. But all around, Thor is a great movie to me. I mean, think about it. How do you even make a film like that? You have the Iron Man movies, pretty grounded. You have the Hulk film, also a little bit grounded, but still have some supernatural elements. You have Thor, a god from space. You're introducing outer space. You're introducing aliens. You're introducing gods, magic. And they managed to make it work. How do you do that? So this film gets extra points for just pulling that off. At number 18 for me has got to go to Iron Man 3. This is the first MCU film that I ever saw in the theater, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I still pretty much love the film. I love that Tony Stark is really serious in this film. I love his PTSD. All of that works because it develops Tony in a way that, okay, he's scared now. He fears what might come, so he starts building suits. All of that works for me. Even the Aldrich killing and stuff, even though that stuff is pretty much Incredibles and Batman Forever, it it works for me. It works for me for a little bit. And also in the teasers and the trailers and the first half of this film with the Mandarin is pretty great. He turns out to be a very intimidating foe. And then we get to the last half of the second act and also the full third act. And even though we have the house party protocol activated here and just having the Iron Man army throw down with the extremist army, all of that is great. Just, the Mandarin and Aldrich Killian just fall to me. It just falls, really. But I loved everything they did with Tony. I think Shane Black is a great director for an Iron Man film because his dialogue for Tony and for actually all of these characters work inside of this universe, and especially for Tony. I think this is probably like the best, wittiest dialogue that Tony has had in his own Iron Man films, aside from the first one. I think the first one was a little bit better than this one. All around, it's a B-tier movie and not a bad Christmas movie, honestly. And number 17 for me has got to go to Ant-Man and the Wasp. This and Iron Man 3, any day I can go back and forth on. I could have said Iron Man 3 was at number 17. But for me, I think just Ant-Man and the Wasp for now is the more enjoyable film. Only because it just has the lowest amount of stakes. It's right after Infinity War. It becomes a nice little palate cleanser for us, so we really don't have to worry about anything. It's a film that knows what it is. It's not trying to be Infinity War. It's not trying to be Endgame. It's just trying to be a fun installment inside of the MCU right after one of the biggest events of cinematic history. And I love the fact that they just embraced that. They embraced the fact that it's supposed to be small. I mean, it's Ant-Man and the Wasp. They're supposed to be small. It's supposed to have the least amount of stakes. All around, I say that this movie is pretty enjoyable, but in some instances, it becomes pretty bland. The jokes really don't land that much for me. Not anymore as they used to. Overall, this film isn't really that memorable. It's very forgettable as well as the villain. But I do feel like this is the most lighthearted film on this list. At number 16 for me has got to go to Ant-Man, a nice heist film inside of the MCU. I love the planning of the heist. I love it when they execute the heist. All of that works, and it works because it is Ant-Man. Ant-Man as a character should be able to do little heists and stuff like this. I love how they introduce new technology to the world of the MCU with the Pym particles shrinking and then enlarging. All of that works for me. Very hilarious. You introduce some great characters like Michael Pena. Introduce some great gravitas characters like Hank Pym, portrayed by Michael Douglas. All of that works for me. And just Paul Rudd, I think he just fits the role of Ant-Man really great here. The film's villain isn't the strongest. It's a very beat-by-beat ripoff of the Ironmonger, and Ironmonger really wasn't that great of a villain either, in my opinion. But I do believe that this film works on the fact that it is a heist film. It is something different inside of the MCU. And although some of it is played very seriously, it still has a very great lighthearted tone. Kicking off my top 15 list for me has got to go to Spider-Man Far From Home. I think that this is the 5th best Spider-Man film for me. You can check out that ranking up above. I really do enjoy this film. I mean, when it came out, I thought this was the best Spider-Man film. But as time grew and as I learned a little bit more criticism on it, I can't really make excuses for the film anymore. The movie isn't the best Spider-Man movie anymore. It's not really that great. It is very good in my opinion. I thought that it was a very solid addition to the MCU, very solid Spider-Man film. I just don't think that the eat of stuff really works that well, and I constantly say this in every ranking that I have Spider-Man Far From Home in. Is this a Spider-Man movie, or is this just Peter Parker and his friends on a road trip in Europe? That's what I basically say, because it basically is that. I do love Mysterio as a villain. I think Jake Gyllenhaal plays him perfectly well. Tom Holland is still pretty great as Spider-Man. I love what they do with him kind of having PTSD now, with him wanting to get away from all of the superhero stuff, wanting to relax, go on a vacation, trying to meet a girl, mingle. I thought all of that worked. Just the eat of stuff didn't. It didn't really feel like a Spider-Man movie. It felt like Peter Parker and his friends on a road trip in Europe. And although it did feel very much like a high school film again, it just didn't have that charm that Homecoming had, in my opinion. And this film has the best Spider-Man action in any type of Spider-Man film. I know I've said some pretty negative things about it. This film does have some great action inside of it, and it does have the best suit out of all Spider-Man films. At number 14 for me has got to go to Doctor Strange. Our first trip to the wizarding world of the MCU is a good one. I mean, I know a lot of people probably don't like this movie because It's very bland. It's very formulaic. It's kind of like the first Iron Man film, whereas the first Iron Man film is a lot better than this one. And like I said, it's very MCU formulaic. You can push the Doctor Strange character through the MCU formula, and this is what you get. But in my opinion, I do believe that Doctor Strange is a very good movie. It's almost up there with great. I do believe that Benedict Cumberbatch is Doctor Strange, in my opinion. All of the weird, twisty elements about this film, all of it is just amazing to me. I wish I was able to see this film in 3D. I was not. I didn't see it in theaters either. But I do love all of the twisty, world-bending elements about it. The CGI inside of this film is very great. It's crazy how this film had a less budget than Black Panther, I believe. So, yeah, the CGI inside of this film is all pretty great. They introduce a lot of things that push forward inside of the MCU, like the Time Stone, the Staff of the Living Tribunal. They introduce magic proper inside of this film. All of it worked for me. Our first trip to kind of the wizarding world, like I said in the beginning, is still a very good one. And I can't wait for the sequel. It's my highest anticipated MCU film at this point. At number 13 for me has got to go to Avengers Age of Ultron. In any other list, even in my last one, in any other list, this film would have been at number 10 for me. But I gotta say, I love this film. I love this film. Even though it's gone down 3 points, I love Avengers Age of Ultron. It was the first Marvel movie I think I was ever really excited for. I mean, yeah, I've seen, the Avengers up to this point. I've seen Iron Man 3 up to this point. But I never really was that excited for a Marvel film until this movie was coming out. And I felt the hype, honestly. Like, I loved the merchandise. I loved all of it. I think this film had the biggest merchandise promotion out of any of the other MCU films. I mean, Civil War, Spiderman Homecoming, they try to come close, but I think this has some of the best marketing in any type of MCU film. And Avengers Age of Ultron just works for me because we're all together here. The family is together here. The Avengers, they're just cracking jokes. They're just having a fun time. It seems like everybody wants to be there. It seems like everybody wants to have a good time with this film. Yeah, though we do have a lot of jokes, I do believe that all of it just works because these characters are just so much fun to see on screen. Ultron is such a great villain. It has that MCU polish to it, even though it does try to set up a lot. And I know a lot of people have that negative upon the film, that it does try to set up a lot. And even though it sets up like 3 sequels, I do believe that Avengers Age of Ultron is still a great movie, and I still love it, and I think I will rewatch this film any day of the week. And number 12 for me has got to go to Captain America, the First Avenger. On any other list, this one would have been underneath, I think, Doctor Strange, or at least underneath Spider-Man Far From Home. But on my last rewatch of this film, I loved it. I loved the First Avenger. And I think it's because I have seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier now. I've seen what Captain America means for a person of color like myself. And I think that I enjoy what this film represents for all of America, really. Black, white, Asian. I think this film works because they didn't just pick up like the strongest man. They didn't just pick up the smartest man. They just picked up a great man. Captain America, Steve Rogers, is just a great man by heart, even before he got the super soldier serum. I think the first half of this film is a perfect superhero origin story. I love Steve Rogers as a character, and if it wasn't for me growing up on Iron Man, then Captain America would be my favorite character inside of the MCU. But when it came to this film, I found myself pretty surprised that I put this above Age of Ultron. But Captain America, the First Avenger is a great movie, and in the beginning, the first half, is just a perfect superhero origin story. At number 11 for me has got to go to Black Widow, the newest addition inside of the MCU. It's a very solid MCU film. I loved it. I loved the family dynamics. I loved Red Guardian. I thought Yelena was the best character inside of the entire film, even though the film is named Black Widow after Natasha. But I also felt like they gave Natasha a more personal story, a more laid down, a more grounded story, and I thought that everything inside of this film was leveled in some verisimilitude. I love the fight scenes. I love Taskmaster's fight scenes, but overall, besides the family dynamics and also the great side characters, and also giving Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, more of a personal arc throughout this film, giving us a little bit more shades of her personality, a little bit more, The villains inside of this film were not that great. Dreykov and also Taskmaster, they weren't that great villains. But I'd be lying if I told you that the first MCU film in 2 years is actually not that good. To me, it's pretty great. Kicking off my top 10 list for me has got to go to Black Panther, a film that I actually really did love when it first came out in theaters when I saw it. And I still kind of love it till this day. I love the culture of it. I love the characterization of T'Challa, introducing this king, this guy that is a king but also a warrior, and he has to protect his kingdom. I loved all of that. Killmonger is a very great villain. I love the world of Wakanda. It has great world building. Just the overall combat and the CGI is just not that good. And because I've seen this film so many times, it's kind of hard to actually rank it among the other MCU films when every time when I'm rewatching the first Avenger, I find something a little bit more that I like about it. When I'm watching Black Panther, I still love it. It's just that I've seen this film so many times. Every one of my family member wants to watch this film all the time. It's just that I've become so oversaturated by it that it has to go at number 10. Not saying it is bad, just saying that I've seen it so many times. At number 9 for me has got to go to Thor Ragnarok. Taika Waititi's take on Thor is the best inside of the Thor series, as you would imagine, because it's a comedy. They've tried to do something different with the character of Thor, and I think that they went in a better route here. The film does have a great level of tone of like seriousness, but also have comedy. Like, it's kind of weird that the film is a comedy, but it also has huge stakes inside of the mix and some pretty dark stuff. And I thought all of that worked perfectly well for me. I think that this is the funniest MCU film in my opinion, and I can't wait to see what Taika Waititi does with Thor Love and Thunder. But I just think that overall, they took Thor in a new direction that I am currently loving. And number 8 for me has got to go to Spiderman Homecoming. Speaking of new directions, I believe that this film took a new direction with Spider-Man, and I thought it all worked out. Instead of giving us a more, adult Spider-Man like the other Spider-Man films have, they kept him as a high schooler. They kept him in the 10th grade and have him do high school things. You have him getting ready for homecoming. You have him going to high school parties. It is a high schooler's look inside of the MCU, and that's a new perspective that we never really knew that we wanted to see inside of the MCU, and I thought all of it worked perfectly well. It's a fun Spider-Man film. It's a fun, solid addition to the MCU as a whole, and I thought all around it's just so enjoyable seeing Spider-Man interact with the broader of the MCU. And just like the Ant-Man movies, this is one of the most lighthearted films inside of the entire MCU, and also I think the most charming of the MCU films. And let's not forget Michael Keaton as the Vulture. I mean, that goes without saying. And number 7 for me has got to go to Captain America Civil War. Over time, I've learned to love Captain America Civil War. I mean, I always loved it, and I remember going to the theater to see it, but it was just always that, okay, yeah, I love the action in it, which I still do. I love all of the character fights, that big airport fight sequence, all of it was pretty great. Bucky versus Cap versus Iron Man, all of it was pretty great. Black Panther getting introduced, Spider-Man getting introduced into the mix. It's like, me playing with my Avengers toys, and then this is basically me playing with my Avengers toys, this film is. But I've always thought of like, okay, yeah, but there are some boring things about this movie. The movie's actually really not that boring. I mean, I thought that the movie was kind of boring because of the Zemo stuff, but now since I've seen more of Zemo inside of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I love his character a little bit more inside of this film. Overall, Captain America Civil War is a great film. It has a lot of emotional impact by the end of the film when you see the Avengers split up, but overall, it is such a great film, and even though it is mostly Avengers 2.5, it is still a Captain America film through and through. And number 6 for me has got to go to Guardians of the Galaxy. James Gunn was able to craft this emotional, heartfelt film for the MCU with the ragtag group of characters that shouldn't really get along that very well, shouldn't really be a family, but also are very unknown and made them household names. I love what this film does. It has a lot of emotional punch inside of it. You get to see the Guardians come together as a family. You're introduced to some great characters like Star-Lord, a guy who's stuck in the 70s or the 80s. You add Gamora into the mix, teasing the villain Thanos. You have Ronan, a villain that is often trashed on, but I think that he's actually okay. And I just think that overall, the Guardians of the Galaxy is just a funny, heartfelt film that has a lot of charm to it and makes you kind of shed a tear when a living tree says, "We are Groot." Kicking off my top 5 list for me has got to go to Avengers Endgame. I love this movie. Just because it's at number 5 does not mean that I hate this film. I love the final battle. I love all of the callbacks to the rest of the MCU. 3 hours and 2 minutes worth of awesomeness. And I just believe that this film is just really great. My only negative about it is the fat Thor stuff. I love what, the development of it. It's just played a little bit too much for laughs. And Professor Hulk, I'm not that big of a fan of that Professor Hulk. I'm not really that big of a fan of this, type of Hulk that wears sweaters. But overall, I thought Avengers Endgame perfectly concluded the Infinity Saga, wrapped it up in a bow in a nice way, a perfect way. And I just think that till this day, this is my second favorite theatrical experience. Also, if I had a time machine, I would definitely go back to 2019 and relive the hype of leading up to Avengers Endgame, because the hype from that first teaser trailer in December 10th, the hype for this film was real and I loved it. And number 4 for me has got to go to the original Iron Man. Yes, some of the stuff inside of the Gomerian cave is not really that, engaging enough. But I just think overall, the witty humor, the characterization of Tony Stark after he gets out of the cave, just seeing him, fly for the first time, having real life Iron Man suit just walk around in, I thought all of it worked pretty nicely. It is one of the most grounded films inside of the entire MCU. Since this is the first MCU installment, it doesn't have the weight of the entire MCU on its back. It can just tell this story about Tony Stark, an arms dealer, changing his ways. And that's what I really love about the film. You're casting in Robert Downey Jr., and that's a huge risk, but he made this role his own, and he also made Iron Man a household name. Kicking off my top 3 list for me has got to go to the Avengers. This is a film that you can only do once because you're bringing in different tones and different genres into the mix. I mean, they did that inside of Avengers Infinity War, but this is actually the first time that they've ever done it. You got a genius billionaire coming into play. You got a gamma radiated scientist, a god from space, a super soldier from the 1940s. You bring them all together and it shouldn't work, but surprisingly, it does. You have that witty banter. It has like the best banter inside of all of the MCU films. You just have this great refreshing tone that works because of Joss Whedon. It is the film that you have the most fun with because it's just so satisfying seeing all of these characters come together and just have a throwdown in New York against aliens. It's the simple heroes versus the cannon fire thing, but all of it is played so well in such an entertaining way, and a lot of people really underrate this movie. My runner-up at number 2 for me has got to go to Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This movie made Captain America cool to me. I mean, he's kicking dudes off of boats. He's using that shield in ways that we've never seen him use it before. He's in his own little spy thriller. We have the Winter Soldier coming into the mix. We have Natasha Romanoff playing the spy part. All of it is just so cool. This movie works for me because instead of America, the world is changing. Captain America stays as he is. He still has his values. He just adapts to that world. And I love the fact that this film portrays Captain America in a way that he's still not fully embraced the new world empire, but he still is able to adapt to this new environment. But if there's something that is wrong that needs to be stopped and he can use his old-fashioned values to do so, he does it inside of this film, and I think that makes Captain America such an amazing character inside of the MCU, and this film made him so cool to me. But coming in at my number 1 for me has got to go to Avengers Infinity War. I think no film on this list gave me the best theatrical experience as this film. I mean, going into it, I expected huge stakes, and that's what I got. I got huge stakes, incredible action. I got to see all of my favorite heroes together on the big screen in like one big movie, and then it's all held up by a formidable foe, a great villain as Thanos. As you can see his point of view to the sides, you still want to see him stop, and you can still see his point of view of why he wants to snap 50% of life from the population. We get some great character moments. We get some great team ups inside of the film. We get to see Tony Stark and Doctor Strange bicker back and forth, and then we get that great emotional shocking ending with half of the population getting snapped. The Avengers lose, and I think overall all of the tension, we're on a time clock, all of the action, all of the characters coming together, this is the culmination of 10 years, and I thought that it was perfect. With that being said, Avengers Infinity War, in my opinion, has to come in at number 1. Alright guys, that was it for my ranking. Please know that everything that I did say in this video was just my very own opinion, and you're free to comment down below your ranking of all 24 MCU films, right from the worst to the best, just like me, or you could just do your favorite. Please don't forget to check out that Twitter that's going to pop up on your screen right now. Please don't forget to check out that Marvel playlist. That link is always in the description. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Peace.